If you're fascinated by the darker sides of humanity, join us every week on our podcast, Serial Killers, where we go deep into notorious true crime cases. With significant research and careful analysis, we examine the psyche of a killer, their motives and targets, and law enforcement's pursuit to stop their spree. Follow Serial Killers wherever you get your podcasts and get new episodes every Monday.
Where does the concept of self live? Is who you are something that lives in one part of your brain, like one little nugget? The nugget of self, if you will. Or is who you are something that lives throughout your entire brain, inside all the neural pathways and networks, grooves and folds? What happens if that nugget gets damaged? What happens if all those pathways and networks and grooves and folds somehow get damaged? What happens to the self if something happens to where it lives? Welcome to Strange and Unexplained with me, Daisy Egan. I am someone who fantasizes about running away from my life and starting fresh somewhere where no one knows me and I can be anyone I want. Who would I be? People think I'm prickly now. Joke's on them. If I could start fresh somewhere else, I would instantly become that creepy lady who lives in the woods and hisses anytime anyone comes near. Of course, these days, it's virtually impossible to disappear from your life. Our digital footprint is anywhere we are and pretty easily accessed. But back before 24-hour news channels, CCTVs, and cell phones, someone determined to drop out of their lives could and did do it. It took a lot of planning, or maybe just a solid bump on the head. On May 19, 1957, the good folk enjoying some refreshments at the Round Table Bar in Omaha, Nebraska, were greeted by a new face when a man carrying a small suitcase, a Navy sea bag, and a bartender's guide, whose Navy driver's license identified him as John Francis Johnson, walked in and caused a stir. Wearing slacks and a sports jacket, a dashing pencil mustache, and speaking in a Boston accent, Fritz, as he called himself, made a quick impression on the people in the area. A Mrs. Betty Augustine would later tell reporters from the United Press International, quote, "He was fascinating, debonair, well-dressed, and not broke. He asked me out," end quote. Fritz told his new friends in Omaha that he'd dropped out of high school and joined the Navy, where he served in both World War II and the Korean War. He was recently discharged, he told them, for a bad back. He went by his nickname Fritz, he explained, because the orphanage on whose steps he'd been left as a baby named all male babies who came in without a name, John Johnson. Fritz made his presence in Omaha known. He drove a hearse he'd outfitted with pillows, a bar, and an incense burner, and called it his hunting vehicle. Gross. Listen, I know it takes all kinds, and I don't mean to kink shame, but ladies, please, for the love of Maria Von Trapp, do not climb into the back of a pillow-lined hearse with some dude and let him do things to you. Because when that hearse pulls into the crematorium with your lifeless body in it afterward, no one is going to bat an eye. Fritz's antics got him a lot of attention around town. For example, there was the time he sat atop a flagpole for somewhere between 15 and 30 days, depending on which source you read, in order to raise money for polio. And I am such a goblin that all I can think of when I hear about a stunt like this is, how did he go to the bathroom? Like, here's a human being doing something amazing to raise money for an awful disease, and all I can think about is, how did he poop? Anyway, regardless of how he pooped, the stunt made Fritz a local celebrity and landed him a job first as a radio station announcer, then a sports director for a television station, and then, according to the UPI, quote, one of the best known, best liked, and most flamboyant personalities in Omaha, end quote. Then there was the time he decided to take up archery and won the Nebraska State Championship 5 weeks later. It's safe to say the folks of Omaha, Nebraska had never encountered a dude like John Fritz Johnson before. Time Life Books described his apartment as being fitted out with dozens of old pillows but no furniture, where he threw wild champagne parties. He wore leather berets and, quote, dated the loveliest girls in town, end quote. He was a big hit with the gals who worked at the local bank, too. For some reason, he wouldn't write the date on his checks, preferring instead to just write the season. And Ethel and Myrtle, which I assume were the names of all the tellers, down at the bank, would call him a few days ahead of the season change to remind him. Despite his Lothario ways and his opinion that anyone who decided to marry was a fool, Fritz settled down with Nancy Zimmer, 15 years his junior, in 1961. Nancy was a divorced single mother who worked as a model. Fritz adopted her daughter, and the couple went on to have a son together. In 1964, doctors discovered a tumor behind Fritz's left eye, and his eye had to be removed. I imagine an eye patch just added to his debonair mystique. But as mysterious as he was, Fritz's persona and backstory were about to get a lot more mysterious. On February 2nd, 1965, at a sporting goods show in Chicago, Fritz was demonstrating archery equipment for a Nebraska archery company when a resident of Akron, Ohio, thought he recognized him. The man called his 21-year-old niece, Suzanne Pica, and told her there was a man at the sports convention who looked an awful lot like Suzanne's missing uncle, Larry Bader. Suzanne hopped on a flight to Chicago to see for herself, and sure enough, she was like, that dude is most definitely Uncle Larry. So she walked right up to him and said, quote, "Pardon me, but aren't you my uncle, Larry Bader, who disappeared 7 years ago?" Strangers, I want to share a podcast with you called Horoscope Weekly. Hosted by the brilliant author and astrologer Aliza Kelly, Horoscope Weekly takes you on an insightful and personalized cosmic journey. Every week, Aliza interprets the latest astrological events, bringing you cosmic insights for the week ahead, along with detailed guidance on what you should expect this week based on your unique zodiac sign. Listen, I'm no astrologer, but I do know that astrology is one of the oldest belief systems that permeates basically every corner of this earth. So there's got to be something there. Aliza also gives tailored advice across love, career, health, and more. Whether you're an astrology enthusiast or a curious newcomer like me, let Horoscope Weekly with Aliza be your guide through the stars. New episodes release every Monday wherever you get your podcasts. Just search for Horoscope Weekly with Aliza Kelly. On May 15th, 1957, Lawrence Larry Bader, father of three with one on the way, who was either a salesman with the Reynolds Metal Company, they of the tinfoil and such, and or owner of a small appliance business, told his wife of 5 years, Mary Lou, quote, "Maybe I will or maybe I won't," end quote, when she asked him to come straight home after a business trip to Cleveland. His plan, instead of returning home promptly to his wife and family, was to go fishing on Lake Erie. Larry, who lived with his family in Akron, had gone to Cleveland to attend to some business and, according to the United Press International, see about some bad checks he'd been stuck with his appliance business. A piece in Time Life Books from March of 1965 reported that he cashed a check for $400, about $4,500 in today money, and paid several bills, including a quarterly insurance premium. That's a lot of money to suddenly withdraw from your account, especially if all you're planning on doing is going fishing. A proprietor at the lake, presumably from some kind of fishing rental service, warned Larry of a bad storm that was coming in. But Larry, wearing slacks and a sports coat, waved him off and set out around 4:30 p.m. The Coast Guard reported seeing Larry on the lake just after dark and also warned him of the imminent storm. But once again, Larry waved off the warnings and continued on. Larry, it seems, while certainly not a swashbuckler or intrepid explorer, was a bit of a risk-taker. He dropped out of high school to join the Navy, served for 2 years, and then flunked out of college after 1 semester because apparently he'd been too busy trying to come up with get-rich-quick schemes. Though why he felt the need to get rich quick is a bit of a mystery. His childhood friends described him as spoiled, as his father was always on hand to give him money when he needed it. But by the time he boarded that small gas-powered boat in May of 1957, it seemed he'd settled down, at least a little, what with a family and his own company. Though Lord knows we all know people who seem to be responsible citizens and are, indeed, schemers or grifters, or at the very least, not good with money. And to be fair, Larry was in quite a lot of debt at this point in his life. He was carrying the equivalent of nearly $250,000 in debt and was in trouble with the IRS for not paying income tax for 5 years. So yeah, he was clearly still having trouble leading an altogether acceptable lifestyle. Anyway, whatever lifestyle Larry Bader was leading seems to have come to an end that night on Lake Erie. His boat was found the next day on the rocks at Perkins Beach with minimal damage, a missing oar, and the gas line disconnected. The boat did not appear to have been capsized, though, meaning it was likely intentionally run ashore. Also, investigators noted that the gas line could not have been accidentally disconnected. Police also found it unlikely that Larry would have been separated from the boat in the water, as he was known to be a good swimmer. Although they also noted that the water had been quite rough because of the storm, and even the strongest swimmers have been known to drown. Some theorized that perhaps he'd been hijacked because it was thought his suitcase was packed with large bills, though how random hijackers would have known that is unclear. It's worth noting that the Great Lakes are actually incredibly dangerous and are considered to be landlocked freshwater seas in many ways. They can be incredibly treacherous under the right circumstances, and most of the lakes have played host to their fair share of shipwrecks. But again, the damage to the boat did not suggest it had been tossed hither and thither in a storm. Although Larry was presumed dead, a search for his body continued for 2 months after he disappeared, to no avail. In 1960, some 3 years after he'd vanished from Lake Erie, Larry Bader was officially pronounced dead. But before Larry was declared dead, just 3 days after he went missing on Lake Erie, a mysterious man calling himself Fritz, whom no one had ever seen before, suddenly appeared at a bar some 800 miles away in Omaha, Nebraska, wearing slacks and a sports coat. And now we find ourselves back at the sporting goods show in February of 1965, where Fritz was demonstrating archery gear for a company out of his hometown, where a young woman named Suzanne asked him if he was not indeed her long-lost Uncle Larry Bader. Fritz, quoting the inimitable Mariah Carey, said, "I don't know her." So Suzanne called her other 2 uncles, Larry's brothers, Dick and John, and was like, "You gotta come to Chicago." So they somehow chartered a private jet, la-di-da, and hopped on over to Chicago, and they too were like, "Bro, you're absolutely our brother Larry." And Fritz was like, "I don't know what to tell you, but my name is Fritz." So John and Dick asked him if he'd submit to fingerprinting down at the local police station, and Fritz was like, "Let's go." Larry, having served in the military, had fingerprints on file, I guess. I don't know how it works. But anyway, Fritz willingly gave his fingerprints, and wouldn't you know, they were a perfect match to Larry Bader. The following day, local papers around the country reported, quote, "Chicago police said yesterday the fingerprints of an Omaha television news director match in all specs to those of an Akron, Ohio man missing for 8 years. Lieutenant Emil Geiss of the Chicago Police Identification Section said the positive comparison made by FBI experts who compared fingerprints to John Francis Johnson with those made of Lawrence Joseph Bader, the missing man. "It's the one and same man," said Lieutenant Geiss, "or else something from the beyond." End quote. So naturally, Fritz was like, okay, the jig is up, you caught me. Actually, what he said was, quote, "I am John Fritz Johnson, and I have never heard of this Bader man until the matter came up." End quote. When confronted with a photo of Larry Bader shortly before he disappeared, Fritz declared, quote, "It certainly does look like me, but I am not that man. Wouldn't I have to be out of my mind to agree to being fingerprinted if I knew I was Bader?" End quote. Fair point. And frankly, if he was trying to pass himself off as someone else, some of his statements didn't exactly point the finger anywhere else. He said, quote, "I could recognize that the voice of one of the brothers sounded like mine, and when we saw each other, there was a striking resemblance between one of them and me. It was like a physical shock. Up until that moment, I had no doubt that I was not Larry Bader, but when I heard that, it was like a door had been slammed and somebody had hit me right in the face." End quote. Whatever Fritz Johnson / Larry Bader's internal turmoil may have been, there were now real-world consequences to face. Not least of which were Larry's widow, Mary Lou Bader, and Fritz's wife, Nancy Johnson. Mary Lou had legally become a widow once Larry's death became official in the eyes of the law. But if Larry wasn't dead, not only was Mary Lou not a widow, Nancy was not a wife. This, I imagine, was quite the headache for both women, who, by the way, looked like they came out of central casting. Mary Lou was blonde and Nancy was a brunette. The poor widowed wife, who it turns out may have actually been abandoned with her 4 children, is the blonde, the angel. And the vixen new wife, who, even though she had no idea her husband was an imposter and still somehow is portrayed as a villain, is the brunette, the devil. If that's not a film noir plot, I don't know what is. Anyway, Mary Lou, to add insult to injury, was now charged with paying back not only the life insurance payout she'd received when Larry was officially declared dead, but also all the Social Security benefits. Imagine you find out your husband, who went missing 8 years earlier and whom you thought was dead, is not only alive and well and living in Omaha, Nebraska with a new, younger wife, but now you also owe well over $500,000 in today money. Plus, Mary Lou was now engaged to a man she'd been with for 3 years. And because Mary Lou and Larry had been married in a Catholic ceremony, and she was indeed a practicing Catholic, divorce was out of the question. So she wouldn't be marrying the man she'd been with for years, and the man she was married to, it turns out, didn't die, but it seemed to her and everyone else had just upped and left her with 3 kids and 1 on the way. Listen, you do you, but any god who wouldn't make an exception in a case like this ain't no friend of mine. Life is hard enough. Let the woman who thought her husband was dead for 8 years get a damn divorce and continue on with her life. Mary Lou, very understandably, was pretty pissed. She told the United Press International that Larry had to step up and be a father to his children. She claimed she and the kids had really only just come to terms with his death. To his credit, despite apparently not believing he even was Larry Bader, Fritz immediately started sending half his salary to Mary Lou. And even though his marriage to Nancy was now void, she said she'd stand by him no matter what. However, an article in the Lima News out of Ohio from 1965 stated she and Fritz were living apart, he was visiting the children daily, and she was unsure of what action the courts would take. And the cherry on top came when Fritz got fired from his TV anchor position. Strangers, Dinnerly is back. Listen, I wish I had time to go to the local market every day and make something wholesome, healthy, and fresh for dinner every night. But I'm no independently wealthy stay-at-home parent. Sure, I stay at home, but I don't have the time. and even if I did, the closest market is a good 20-minute drive away. So I either have to plan my shopping carefully around a pre-planned menu or order in, and I'm no Rockefeller. But Dinnerly does the menu, shopping, and prep for me and delivers everything to my door so I actually can make a wholesome, fresh, delicious meal for my family without spending all my time and money on it. With meals as low as $2.99 a meal, Dinnerly is the most affordable meal kit plan I've found. With Dinnerly, you can choose from over 100 delicious dishes each week, from steak dinners to oven-roasted salmon, or even your favorite takeout dupes. Plus, you can swap out proteins, and each box is fully customizable. There's different serving sizes for families big and small, budget-friendly savor recipes, and options for so many different diets. Low-cal, low-carb, vegetarian, and gluten-free friendly options. Each recipe tells you how long it takes to make it, so if you're especially time-crunched, you can build a box based on prep and cook time. Plus, they've got plenty of plant-based meat alternatives if you're not into meat. My family loved the chicken shawarma burgers, and we finally got Monty to get into sweet potatoes with chili lime sweet potato oven-baked fries. Dinnerly also has a complete market for grocery essentials. Stocked with over 125 items, their market is seasonally updated and changes weekly, so you can get fresh produce, baked goods, ready-to-heat meals, and much more. Make cooking exciting, affordable, and easy with Dinnerly. Head to dinnerly.com/offer/strange and use code STRANGE for up to 25 free meals. Once again, that's dinnerly.com/offer/strange for up to 25 free meals. And make sure you use my promo code STRANGE so they know I sent you. Fritz Johnson / Larry Bader was admitted to a local hospital for testing. Maybe the tumor he'd had removed behind his left eye shortly before people showed up claiming he was someone he didn't know had caused some kind of amnesia. Maybe all the way up until he'd gotten that tumor, he'd been clutching onto the secret of his past life, only to lose all memory of it when the tumor was removed. Or maybe he'd had some kind of psychotic break. Fritz / Larry was subjected to 10 days of testing. There isn't a ton of information about the variety and result of the tests performed, except that Fritz / Larry had become agitated enough during hypnosis that doctors opted not to follow that up with sodium pentothal, aka truth serum. Nevertheless, doctors found no indication that he remembered his life as Larry and no, quote, neurotic and/or psychosis tendencies to explain this loss in memory, end quote. Fritz / Larry's lawyer insisted that it was memory loss due to the removal of the tumor. A diagnosis of amnesia would protect him from legal issues of fraud and bigamy. Of course, the tumor theory wouldn't explain the 7 years leading up to when the tumor was removed, in which he'd been passing himself off as Fritz. It's not as though they were arguing he'd shown up in Omaha with genuinely no memory of his former life in Ohio. So, in theory, he could have been committing fraud for 7 years and now had no memory of it. But, try proving that in court. Unless his new friends in Omaha were protecting him, it sure seems like none of them had ever heard hide or hair about Larry Bader. So he was either exceptionally good at hiding his past, or he genuinely didn't remember it, and Fritz's memories were all unknowingly invented. Maybe Larry received a serious enough bump on the noggin at some point during the fishing trip on Lake Erie that it triggered almost complete amnesia. But that would also mean he decided to invent a backstory rather than admit he couldn't remember anything from before. And I suppose it's not entirely out of the question, then, that if he did invent himself a backstory, that it might have coincidentally included the real detail that he'd dropped out of high school to join the Navy. I suppose plenty of kids did that at the time. Or maybe there were some vestigial memories lurking in the depths, even with the amnesia, and his invented backstory included those memories. Maybe he woke up on the shore of Lake Erie after the storm and something had just triggered a whole new personality? Maybe he really did suddenly think he was Fritz Johnson. His reaction upon being found out certainly suggests he did. It is possible for serious trauma to cause all kinds of things in the brain to go haywire. People who have suffered extreme trauma can block memories out entirely, invent completely false memories that seem real, or conflate things they've seen or heard as their own experiences. But as far as anyone knows, Larry Bader didn't experience trauma to that degree. Though he'd served in the Navy from 1944 to 1946, it's unclear if he ever saw a battle, and there's no mention in any of the reportings that he suffered from PTSD, or what they called shell shock back then. Indeed, it seems the biggest stressor in his life was his finances. According to his friends, he'd been raised without appreciation for money and so never really developed the discipline to make enough to cover his expenses. Before he disappeared, apparently he owed the milkman so much money the family was being threatened with a cutoff of their milk deliveries, which was a big deal back then because people drank milk like it was water. But some friends from his former life in Ohio claimed that the lifestyle Larry had built for himself just wasn't what he'd hoped it would be. The debts and the family responsibilities weren't what he'd signed up for. A former neighbor told Time Life, quote, "Larry wanted to be a high liver and a swinger, but the wife and the kids and all the debts cramped his style. Maybe he just packed up and took off," end quote. Another said, quote, "In our group, if anyone had done some of the things that Fritz Johnson did, the flagpole, the hearse, why no one would have even talked to you," end quote. Where his new friends in Omaha were hip and nonconformist, bartenders, models, newsmen, public relations men. But why Omaha? Listen, I'm sure Omaha is lovely, but why Omaha? And how did he make the nearly 800-mile trip? And in the 3 days between when Larry Bader disappeared and Fritz Johnson appeared, did he really encounter no one who might have come across a news story of the missing Larry Bader with his picture? Was there no record of a Larry Bader or Fritz Johnson buying a bus ticket to Omaha? I suppose he wouldn't have had to give his name. This was, after all, when you could still just walk up to an airline gate and buy a ticket with no ID and just walk onto a plane. Maybe he did that? Or maybe they actually were two separate men. Maybe Larry Bader had an identical twin he didn't know about. I've said it before and I'll say it again. We all know at least one person these days who's found a sibling they had no idea existed through a DNA service. What if, for some reason, who knows, Larry's mother gave birth to twins and just felt like she could only keep one? I don't know how that baby would have ended up in an orphanage in Boston, but I do know it would be unusual for a man from Akron, Ohio to just know how to do a Boston accent back in 1957. It's not like he had YouTube tutorials, you know? Even I, a seasoned, decorated actor, have been asked not to do goofy accents on this podcast after my admittedly very bad impression of JFK. But I was actually aiming for goofy. I don't think Fritz was. To be fair, it's likely the residents of Omaha, Nebraska weren't familiar enough with Boston accents in order to spot a fake. But none of the reporting mentioned anything about his accent being clearly fake. And surely one of the doctors would have pointed that fact out if they thought he was putting it on. If, for example, his Boston accent suddenly disappeared under hypnosis, you'd think it would have been mentioned somewhere. And yes, of course, the long-lost, unknown identical twin story sounds like something out of a Lifetime movie, but I don't know, stranger things have happened. And sure, the question of where on earth Fritz was for the first 30 years of his life before magically appearing in Omaha 3 days after his twin disappeared in Ohio is, a very big question. One would think someone from his previous life would have come forward after the news coverage and been like, "No, that's my buddy Fritz." But no one did. I also couldn't find any information about anyone looking into Fritz's backstory. As far as I can tell, no one tried to corroborate any of it. Was there an orphanage in Boston that could claim John Francis Johnson had grown up there? School records? Was there any record of a John Francis Fritz Johnson serving 13 years in the Navy? Were there hospital records proving he'd been hospitalized for a bad back, as he claimed? Anything? Sure, the fingerprints matched, but afterward, Fritz kept insisting he had no idea who Larry Bader was. Wasn't anyone curious to see if there was any truth to Fritz's backstory? Strangers, ritual is back. Listen, it's common sense that when you feel better physically, you feel better mentally. But did you know that your physical health actually impacts your mental health? We are learning more every day about how our gut microbiome affects our mental health. And if you're one of those magical unicorns that's like, my mental health is tip-top, first off, congratulations. And second, it's not just about your mental health. A healthy gut microbiome helps support a healthy immune system and, of course, digestion. And if you're looking for a healthy, balanced gut microbiome, Ritual has got your back. Or rather, your biome, with Symbiotic Plus, a 3-in-1 supplement of clinically studied pre, pro, and postbiotics to support a balanced gut microbiome with daily use. The little minty pill that doesn't require refrigeration can go wherever you go, so even if you have a busy schedule, you can do good for your body wherever you are. I have definitely noticed a difference in the way I feel when I support my system with biotics. I feel less bloated and heavy, and I swear I've been noticing clearer skin. Plus, Ritual and Symbiotic are vegan-friendly and formulated without GMOs, major allergens, animal products, shady fillers, and artificial colors, which you know I appreciate. So, get your gut going. Support a balanced gut microbiome with Ritual's Symbiotic Plus. Get 25% off your first month at ritual.com/strange. That's 25% off at ritual.com/strange. Happy squatting! Larry Bader / Fritz Johnson died when the tumor behind his eye came back about a year and a half after the question of his identity came to light, leaving more questions than answers. When Mary Lou died in 2012, Larry was listed as preceding her. She never remarried. Nancy is possibly still alive. She was only 25 when this whole thing came to pass, and I wasn't able to find an obituary for her. His children are all likely still living as well, but as far as I can tell, none of them have made this story a focus point in their life. So often, the children of people with wild stories choose to write books or otherwise somehow make their parents' story their own bread and butter. And really, why shouldn't they? But the children of Larry Bader and Fritz Johnson, it seems, have largely kept to themselves. Was Larry Bader just pulling a long con? Was he acting? Listen, I can tell you from experience that acting isn't easy. Even in short spurts on stage or in front of a camera, it's hard to pull off truly believable character work. And that's with someone else writing the character for you. If Larry was acting, he not only would have had to have been a great actor, but he would have had to have come up with a backstory worthy of a truly gifted writer. It's not like Fritz Johnson was the quiet, private type. He liked to host parties and keep the champagne flowing. It's doubtful he didn't have much to say. And where there is a storyteller, there's usually a colorful backstory. There must have been more than the few details we know he shared. Indeed, according to the UPI piece, quote, he enthralled his friends with vivid stories of a boyhood in a Boston orphanage and 13 years in the Navy, end quote. As far as we know, not one of Fritz's friends, lovers, or acquaintances in Omaha ever suspected him of lying. And a man like that, a troubadour, easy with the stories, isn't one to answer a question with a simple, I don't want to talk about it. Fritz Johnson clearly had stories for days. But if he truly didn't remember being Larry Bader, where did the stories come from? Where did that Boston accent come from? If he truly believed he was Fritz Johnson, then his brain must have been making up stories without him being aware of it. And I don't know about you, stranger, but that just doesn't sit right with me. Without trauma to account for it, either the physical or psychological kind, neither of which doctors found evidence of in Fritz / Larry's brain, How do you explain someone's brain just making shit up? Who's to say I am who I think I am? What about all those hours I spent sleeping in my 20s? Who's to say I didn't wake up and just start a new life with no memory of it? Who's to say all these things I think are memories aren't just some invention of my own brain tricking me into remembering a life that never actually happened? I mean, sure, there's actual videotape proof of my life before, so I'm relatively certain I am who I think I am. Fritz/Larry didn't have the benefit of a life recorded on film. From all the coverage I looked at, there were very few pictures of either man. I showed my husband a side-by-side of Larry Bader and Fritz Johnson before Fritz had his eye removed, and without missing a beat, my husband said, yeah, that's the same man. I can't be the only one freaked out about this, right? Listen, I'm no neuroscientist, but it seems to be one's own brain should, I don't know, be in cahoots with one's self? What happened to Larry Bader? You know me, stranger. I am not one to lean into alien abduction theories, but what if? There are so few stories where a plausible answer isn't hiding in plain sight. I don't know. What if someone or something from somewhere else plucked Larry Bader out of that fishing boat in Ohio and plopped him down in Omaha 4 days later with a whole new identity and backstory? Honestly, I think I'm more comfortable believing that than the possibility that someone's brain can just wipe out one's whole history and invent a new one with very little provocation. And so, from now on, stranger, I'm wearing a tinfoil-lined helmet wherever I go, and canceling that solo fishing trip. I suggest you do the same. Next time on Strange and Unexplained. In December of 2017, one of Canada's, and indeed the world's, wealthiest couples was found dead in their palatial home in Toronto. With very few clues, some serious ineptitude on the part of the police, and a long list of potential suspects, the double murder of Barry and Honey Sherman remains unsolved. Strange and Unexplained is a production of Three Goose Entertainment with help from Grab Bag Collab. This episode was written by me, Daisy Egan, with research by the Strange Research Squad. Editing help from Amber Hunt, and sound engineering and mixing by Henry Lavoie. If you have an idea for an episode, head to our website, strangeandunexplainedpod.com, and fill out the contact form. I will write back. For more amazing content, join us at patreon.com/grabbagcollab, where for just $5 a month you get all the Grab Bag exclusive shows, and for $8 you get those, plus Amber Hunt's Crimes of the Centuries and Strange and Unexplained early and ad-free. Grab Bag is an all-female and non-binary-owned profit-share network where our contributors get to keep ownership of their shows. We strive to give a platform to those who might not be able to land themselves on a bigger network. Who knows, maybe you have a podcast idea you'd like to pitch to Grab Bag. We've got live recordings, watch parties, book clubs, and more. Why, there's so much going on over at Grab Bag, you'd wondered if we missed the memo on how capitalism works. Join me on Instagram at SNUPod, Daisy Egan, and Grab Bag Collab, and head over to the Facebook page to join in the conversation. If you like the show, please visit a sponsor with our unique code, give us a quick review and 5 stars, subscribe and download, and tell a friend. If you don't like the show, feel free to keep that opinion to yourself. Thanks! Stay strange.